And we're back in the studio like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Go pick me out a winner, Bobby. Today marks 41 years since the release of my second favorite sports movie ever made, behind this film, which you won't be able to see when I squeeze the image, Chariots of Fire, and a movie that is absolutely in my top 10 all-time favorite films, Barry Levinson's terrible adaptation of Bernard Malamud's incredible 1952, I believe it was, novel, The Natural. Now, when I say it's a terrible adaptation, I'm kind of being funny, I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not joking. And what I mean specifically is the movie, at least 90% of the movie, is directly from the book. This is not like Clint Eastwood's Absolute Power, which went in an entirely different direction in the film while still somewhat following the book closely. Tom Cruise in The Firm, where the entire second half, they just basically blew up what John Grisham had come up with. In this movie, despite following the plot of the book very, very closely, Barry Levinson, the filmmaker, and Robert Redford, the star, they took the whole point of the book and set fire to it, and then they took a crap on it. The whole point of Bernard Malamud's book was basically, no matter how much natural talent you have, you could be like a god in terms of your talent. If you lack character, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference how talented you are. Okay, that was Malamud's point. It is a very sour, bitter, angry book about a flawed man, Roy Hobbs, the name of the character. He's even more gifted in the world of the book. He seems like almost a deity. In the world of the film, he's almost as talented, but it's more believable. He's more of a realistic, a slightly enhanced version of Babe Ruth would be how I would describe him. He seems to have some godlike abilities, but in the book, it's a whole nother level of ridiculousness. The movie seems to be saying having a lot of talent is enough if you have character. It's taking it and doing one of these and just flipping it, going like that. You know what? We did the best we could here. Because it took 30 years for Hollywood to adapt a book that if you read it in the 50s, you would say, oh my God, this would be a movie, except for the fact that it's a pretty depressing last act. Sorry for spoilers. And the book was written with the 1919 Black Sox scandal 3 decades prior. And it was a very pessimistic story by Malamud. There had been a baseball player named Eddie Waitkus, Waitkus, Eddie Waitkus. Eddie Waitkus had met this woman who became obsessed with him and shot him nearly to death. That made a deep imprint on the author Bernard Malamud, a fantastic all-time legendary author. He also wrote, The Fixer, among others. He wrote the book like as if he was in a bad mood, as if he was angry with what the sport of baseball had become. Stop me if you've heard this before. There were people angry with what the sport of baseball had become 70 to 75 years ago. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But the reason why it took so long to produce this movie is what I just said. You're not going to have a big budget period piece baseball film with a golden boy movie star like a Robert Redford. Or if you had gone back 2 decades, like a James Stewart, hell, like an Anthony Perkins in Fear Strikes Out, you're not going to make a big, epic style fairy tale baseball movie and have it be a bruiser of a film like an 8 Men Out, which is, I think, my second favorite baseball film. That's about the Black Sox scandal, but unlike Field of Dreams, which covers similar territory, it is a dry, almost recounting, here's what happened. Players got fucked, and the players basically pushed back. Oops, probably shouldn't have done that. But that's the way things go. And that's the way baseball was. It was very corrupt. Whatever we see now, it's not the same level. I don't really think that baseball is corrupt. You might say the commissioner is incompetent, but that's something else entirely. So my father read this book. He was a fan of the book. And unlike 13 years later when he took me to see the Clint Eastwood adaptation of Absolute Power, in that instance, he knew the book was going to be changed for sure, because the character that Clint Eastwood plays in that movie, spoiler alert, is dead halfway through the book. Sorry for spoilers. Luther Whitney does not survive more than 50% of the book. And my father correctly calculated that if Clint Eastwood was playing Luther Whitney, he's not dying halfway through. They're going to have to do something else to make this movie. Well, in the world of the natural, they don't really do something else except at the very, very end. Because the Black Sox scandal angle is still present in the movie. But instead of a critical character not only taking a bribe, but acting as if I took the bribe and I need to play like shit on purpose, it does not go at all like that. So I walked into this movie. My dad, may he rest in peace, Alan Philip Cohen, the C in SCF and Company. I know many of you know, but for those who are new to the channel, maybe you don't. Not only the biggest movie fan I have ever known, but the biggest Yankee lifelong diehard that you would have ever had the opportunity to meet. My father was a baseball fan from before Bernard Malamud's novel, The Natural, came out. My father's first fan season, he was 8 going on 9 in 1951, a big year in Yankees history and a big year in New York baseball history. That was the year the Giants came back from 13 games behind the Dodgers. They cheated. Google that. They cheated. They did. They caught the Dodgers, they passed them, and then they beat them. Bobby Thompson, the Giants win the pennant, the shot heard around the world, most famous home run in baseball history. And then the Yankees beat the New York Baseball Giants in the World Series, but that was Mickey Mantle's rookie year and Joe DiMaggio's final year. That was my father's first fan season. Well, he took me to see The Natural on its opening weekend, the second week of May of 1984, 41 years ago. And I'm telling you, I can still remember what it was like to be in the theater that night. I had a general idea of what the movie was about, but in 1984, the long pre any kind of social media era, I'm not even sure that I saw a trailer for this film. All I knew was it was a baseball movie, and my dad said the book was very good. And I don't remember anything else. And I guess I knew who Robert Redford was. Maybe he had rented, I think that my dad had rented the movie The Sting. We had recently, and this is ridiculous, we had gotten a VCR, a VHS. VCR player, whatever you want to call it. I'm not even sure I used the terminology right just now. I may have said it backwards. But I knew who Robert Redford was. I had seen The Sting. Which would mean that I knew who Paul Newman was at age 10. Not bad. Not bad. But all I knew was it was a baseball movie. Now we watched the film, and I loved it. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. It seems to go by in an hour. It is a rocket through time. It starts with the main character of Roy Hobbs as a kid, a pitcher. He's basically Babe Ruth. He is a left-handed wizard, maybe the best left-handed pitcher, or in the world of the film, pitching prospect, that anyone has ever seen. And then there's another character in the film named Walter Wambo, played by the great Joe Don Baker. He's also supposed to be like a Babe Ruth character. It's strange that the Babe inspired two characters in the same movie. But Roy Hobbs, who is earmarked for greatness, he is ticketed for pitching greatness in what I think is supposed to be the early 1920s. I think that's where we start the story, and then we pick up in the, I guess, the late 1930s. It's not really important, the specifics of that, like what year it's supposed to be, because the movie doesn't exactly tell us what year it's supposed to be. But if you go into this cold, it seems to be a story of a naturally talented baseball player in the world of the film who is a lights-out pitcher. This is a prime Sandy Koufax kind of a lefty. He's way beyond anything. Babe Ruth was an incredible pitcher. He started as a pitcher, and look, he's the greatest hitter that we've ever seen. So maybe we'll just take him off the mound and we'll do something else. We'll put him in the outfield so that he can hit, because he does that better than anyone we've ever seen. But something happens to Roy Hobbs early in the film, and it spins it in a different direction. What I mentioned about this guy, this Eddie Waitkus, who was shot, something like that happens to Roy Hobbs. And when we pick up his story, And I remember being just as surprised as anybody else at what happens to young Roy Hobbs. And Redford, he was in his mid-40s at the time. They don't really do that much with makeup, but they light him in such a way that he doesn't look like he's 18, but it doesn't strain credulity as much as it otherwise might. Barry Levinson was very careful, and I think Caleb Deschanel was the cinematographer. I'm not sure. I could be wrong about that. But he is lit so perfectly throughout the film. We pick up Roy Hobbs' story. He's in his 30s. He's no longer a pitcher. Now he's an outfielder, and he's playing for this dog-ass New York team, a National League team called the New York Knights. And there's a whole lot of behind-the-scenes maneuverings. There's two owners of the team, one of which is the manager, Pop Fisher. He's kind of a Casey Stengel type. Casey Stengel was someone who looked a lot older than he really was. You see footage and pictures of Casey Stengel when he was in his 30s. The guy looked like he was 60. So who better to play a Casey Stengel, Sparky Anderson type character in Pop Fisher than none other than the Beatus himself, Wilford Brimley, who was still in his 40s. Cocoon was the next year where he was going to play like 3 decades older than his actual age. But Wilford Brimley is absolute fire as Pop Fisher. Oh, and also, one thing that is emphasized more in the book but not the movie, Malamud wanted this to be a little bit of an Arthurian legend story. So the idea that the guy's name is Pop Fisher, Fisher King, get it? And Roy Hobbs, as a kid, makes a baseball bat. He creates a baseball bat forged from lightning, literally forged from lightning. I'm not exaggerating. And he calls the bat what? Wonder Boy. He calls it Wonder Boy. The bat that he makes is supposed to be Excalibur. Now, seeing this when I was 10, that went way over my head. I had no idea that this was an Arthurian legend story. But as an older person, you start giggling at the various references. There's all sorts of phallic, symbols and ideas and masculinity. It's all over the text. But Robert Redford at the center, I believe this is the best performance of his career. Now, Redford is somebody, and I talked about Warren Beatty. There are only 4. They're the kind of 4 kings of guys who were born in the mid-30s. Nicholson, Redford, Hoffman, Beatty. It's not really a knock on Redford to say that he is the weakest actor of the 4. And it's not a knock on the others to say that in this role, he is as good as any of them have ever been in any other role, because it's not always about acting talent. It's not always about dramatic range. It's about how well a screen persona fits a certain kind of character. For example, and I did a short a while back where I talked about how Jack Nicholson, with A Few Good Men, and Robert Redford with Sneakers, they had 2 films in production at around the same time. And I imagine if you flip the casting, you could make Sneakers, which is a kind of comic heist film with an action element, a little romance. You could make that movie with Jack Nicholson. And you sure as hell, because Redford, even in the early 90s, had the bearing and the standing of somebody who could be a lifelong military guy. Redford could have played Colonel Nathan Jessup. The film would have worked. Wouldn't have worked as well. And Sneakers, as much as Jack Nicholson, I believe, would have had an absolute blast making that movie. It doesn't work as well as it does with Redford because he was perfect for that role. And there was no other actor ever in history, you can give me your Daniel Day-Lewis or Bobby D or Pacino, no other actor could have played Roy Hobbs half as good as Redford. Because part of it is that Robert Redford, he's an old guy now. He's in his upper 80s. He was a great baseball player. He swung like Ted Williams, for crying out loud. I mean, the guy was an absolute boss on the field. And that's something with sports movies. You need someone who is believable in the role. Otherwise, you say, what the fuck? I mean, I love Gary Cooper, but he really can't swing as Lou Gehrig. And William Bendix in the Babe Ruth story. No offense, I'm sorry to William Bendix's estate. I had a better left-handed swing than William Bendix, and I played baseball righty. You get my drift. Redford sells it because he throws the baseball like Andy Pettitte or Whitey Ford, and he swings like Ted Williams. it all coalesces into this incredible whole. And the casting in this film, and there are times in history, and the great producer, the late great Robert Evans, talked about how there are certain movies, if you're in the business as long as Evans was, and if you're in the business as long as, for example, Barry Levinson, there are times, and Levinson, I should point out, was not that long ago interviewed by the former ESPN reporter, sportscaster, works for the NFL Network, and has a really good podcast, Rich Eisen. The Natural is one of Rich Eisen's favorite movies, and they talked about it, I think, for the better part of an hour. And what Levinson would say is, in his career, he didn't say this exactly, but if you listen to the interview, you watch the podcast, he implies this. Sometimes you just get lucky and get every single performer you want for every role, regardless of what you would think their cost might be. And in The Natural, in the role of the kind of mysterious woman who serves the Eddie Waitkus angle of the story with young Roy Hobbs, they got Barbara Hershey, a very resourceful actor who was nominated for at least one Oscar in her career. For the later era femme fatale of Memo Paris, a much more unlikable character in the book than she is in the movie, they got Kim Basinger, who was fresh off a really solid performance with Sean Connery and Klaus Maria Brandauer in the kind of renegade James Bond film Never Say Never Again. So you had Kim Basinger and Barbara Hershey playing different versions of a femme fatale kind of a character. Then you had Glenn Close, whose career was rising hugely. She had been in World According to Garp the previous year with Robin Williams. You got the awesome Richard Farnsworth as the kind of bench coach, if you will, who works with Wilford Brimley's Pop Fisher. And Richard Farnsworth, what an amazing actor. He's phenomenal in the Stephen King adaptation, the Rob Reiner of Stephen King's Misery. He is great in that film. He almost could have gotten a supporting actor nomination, the role of the sheriff, just not quite big enough. But then he was nominated for a Best Actor award in '99 for The Straight Story, the only David Lynch film that was rated G. Farnsworth is phenomenal. And then you have the lifelong end boss cheat code, just like a Gene Hackman, in the magnificent Robert Duvall. Robert Duvall as Max Mercy, the sports writer, it is an absolutely staggeringly skillful performance. It is that good. And where the fuck was Robert Duvall's Oscar nomination? He is revelatory. And then you have Darren McGavin in his first role after what? Playing the old man in Bob Clark's A Christmas Story. You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Darren McGavin went unbilled. He is not listed in the credits of The Natural. It was some kind of a similar to what happened with Gene Hackman a decade later with The Firm, where his name wasn't going to be above the titles. And in the case of The Natural, McGavin's name was not going to be on the poster. I assume that's why he went unbilled, because an actor of his stature, why wouldn't his name be in the credits? So it is a big role. And McGavin, if you only know him from A Christmas Story, you can see he's just about the same age. Maybe it was shot only a couple of months after A Christmas Story. You can't believe what he does in this film. He plays the character of Gus Sands exactly as the guy comes across in the book. You could not do it any better than Darren McGavin does it in this film. And so the movie not only takes the form of the Arthurian legend, it is a story of overcoming obstacles. It is a story of personal growth. None of that is in the book, even though scene for scene, beat for beat, there are so many elements of the book that are almost translated word for word, beat for beat. And yet it feels like something other than the book. And that is to the credit of Barry Levinson, that he was able to make it work and make such a beautiful movie in every sense of that word. Such a beautiful, gorgeous film. And intensely emotional. I'm not really giving much away. You cast Robert Redford in this sort of a film, spoiler alert, he doesn't die at the end. Okay? He doesn't die at the end of the book either. There's another spoiler for you. But you're not going to give the audience all of this negativity and all of these down moments, despite the fact that he looks like Robert Redford, and he has this incredible talent even in his, kind of 30s era, meaning age 30s. You're not going to just keep beating this guy down over and over to not have him surmount something. And the characters they're so likable. The only character in the film that you could say is really a pure heel, well, if you want to say the Barbara Hershey character, but the character Gus Sands is just an asshole. But I think he's a believable asshole. The worst character is the character played by Robert Prosky, another great supporting actor. He was with Arnold in Last Action Hero. He plays the theater owner, the projectionist, who kind of sets the entire plot of the story in motion. Man, Robert Prosky was awesome. He was also in Mrs. Doubtfire with Robin Williams. He was great. But the film doesn't seem to be taking the form of your typical underdog inspirational sports movie a la Rocky. And the book, even though it's beat for beat, the book doesn't come across like that either, because it's so pessimistic and so negative for most of it, whereas the movie keeps giving you these halo shots of Redford, framing him in such a way, again, not an accident, you feel like this is building towards something deeply emotional and fantastic. And it's not really much of a spoiler to say that it really does. But yes, you get the idea in the world of the film that Roy Hobbs is touched by God, almost literally. It's just not to the insane extent in the world of the book. But I remember being in the theater, seeing this film that night with my father, and being almost as excited as I was when my parents dragged me 3 or so years earlier to see Chariots of Fire against my will, and within 10 minutes, I forgot I was in a movie theater and all but had an out-of-body experience because that film just got to me so deeply. I didn't have an out-of-body experience seeing The Natural, but I enjoyed every minute of it, even though there's a little bit of objectionable content for a kid. The film was rated PG. The PG-13 rating was actually going to come out later in the summer of '84 with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but I think specifically it was Joe Dante's Gremlins that was responsible. I always thought that it was Spielberg's Temple of Doom, and Spielberg wasn't wrong when he said, hey, I'm not trying to make rated R movies here. We need a separate rating, and he was right. The PG-13 rating, I think, was very good. But this film probably should have gotten a PG-13 rating. I'm glad it didn't, because my parents were actually sticklers when it came to that. They didn't want me watching rated R movies ever, and I had to kind of sneak every now and then to see a rated R movie, hope that someone wasn't paying attention, or my mom was upstairs asleep and dad wasn't home yet, whatever the case might be. There is a little bit of sexual content in this film, and there is the idea of a young kid who is in a relationship with a woman that is supposed to be his life partner, and he is flirting heavily with what turns out to be a very dangerous older woman. I mean, there's all kinds of, this is a film you could really take apart and have a lot of laughs if you want to, if you really want to do a deep dive into the themes and what the movie is still telling us. The movie is definitely telling us the sheep who strays away from the flock needs to return to the fold to get his happy ending. And, that's what she said. When I say happy ending, I'm not trying to be cheeky in this particular context. But there is a moment in the movie. It's one of my favorite quotes in a history of cinema, or the history of cinema as I know it. When I think of great quotes, I think of, for example, Jim Carrey at the end of The Truman Show. In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Clint Eastwood, go ahead, make my day. That wasn't in Dirty Harry, but it was in a Dirty Harry film, Sudden Impact. Well, there's a moment in this movie where Excalibur, Roy Hobbs's Excalibur, breaks. It's a bat. Bats break. Maybe he's facing Mariano Rivera, who used to break 3 or 4 bats every time he went out there with that cut fastball. Wonder Boy breaks. And the Bat Boy, who had become friends with Roy Hobbs in the world of the film, and they actually made a bat together. Roy Hobbs is presented as a much nicer person in the movie. That is also not an accident, not a coincidence. They wanted to make him a way more likable character than the fucking asshole that he mostly is in the book. I mean, he's understandable in the book, but he's just not, it's very difficult to kind of really root for him the way that he comes across in the book. But his bat breaks. It's a game situation. The game is on the line. The Knights are going to lose. Pop Fisher is going to have to sell the team to that nasty judge, the Robert Prosky character in the world of the film. And a bat boy comes over, and as Roy Hobbs holds the pieces of his destroyed Wonder Boy, he just very quietly says, "Go pick me out a winner, Bobby." That is the greatest line reading in Robert Redford's career. The sincerity, the almost coldness, the understanding that all the pressure is still on me no matter what bat I have in my hands. If I strike out, we're all fucked. I'm never going to play again. Pop is screwed. The bad guys win. Go pick me out a winner, Bobby. It is a chills-inducing line reading. And this is one of those films that has multiple moments that for fans such as myself, you get goosebumps whenever you see it. The moment earlier in the film when Roy Hobbs is first impressing the New York Knights, because he's so old. Why is this guy not a coach? How could he be a player? Look at him. Wilford Brimley's Pop Fisher. He sends him up to pinch hit early in the film, or relatively early in the film. All right, Hobbs, knock the cover off the ball. And damned if Roy Hobbs doesn't actually knock the cover off the baseball. That's not something that can happen in the natural world. The stitching would have to be loose ahead of time. It's what we call a null set. It is a 0%. But every time Roy Hobbs, Robert Redford as Roy Hobbs, connects with the baseball and knocks the cover off it, it's goosebumps. This film has more goosebumps-inducing moments for me than any other movie. Chariots of Fire has a bunch. The moment at the very end of that film, this is not really a spoiler, when old Andrew Lindsay is talking to Harold Abraham's former roommate, Aubrey Montague. He did it. What's that? He ran them off their feet. Because earlier in the film, the character of Harold Abrahams had said his stated goals, not just to win Olympic gold. I'm going to run them off their feet, meaning the people who were out to get him, who looked to denigrate him simply by virtue of his birth, of who he was, his ethnicity. I'm going to run them off their feet. Well, in the world of that film, he did, in fact, run them off their feet. In a world of the natural, the bat boy, he picks out a winner. He picks out the bat that the two of them made together. Excalibur Light, if you will. Wonder Boy Light, if you will. And there is just something about certain movie stars at certain times. And what I want to close on is a moment between Redford and Wilford Brimley, which I feel like sums up the film. Because the character of Pop Fisher is angry when we meet him. And Roy Hobbs' incredible success, which translates to the team becoming a title contender, a pennant contender. He's grown to really not just like Roy Hobbs, but love Roy Hobbs. Roy Hobbs has given him an opportunity to maybe hold on to his share of the ownership of this team. And the two guys have a conversation where Wilford Brimley's Pop Fisher wanted him to be a farmer. His mom wanted him to be a farmer. Joey said, you should be a farmer. And he ended up in baseball, and he was miserable until Roy Hobbs walked into his life in the middle of this particular baseball season. And Wilford says, my mom always wanted me to be a farmer. She said I ought to be a farmer. And Redford, with that halo effect, as if he's an angel, and that incredible smile that Robert Redford was blessed with. And you can't teach somebody to look like Robert Redford, right? Maybe Brad Pitt, but that's about it. The way that Robert Redford says, my dad wanted me to be a baseball player. He was following what his parents wanted him to do, or in that case, his dad. Whereas Wilford went against the wishes of his mom. You should be a farmer, gets into baseball, and has mostly been...
Sorry, we're going to finish the episode over here. I had a little bit of a malfunction with the thing that I hold the phone on. So that moment between Wilford Brimley and Robert Redford also is chills-inducing. And there's so much of this movie that is, and a big part of that is Randy Newman's sensational musical score. It is a top 10 greatest scores as far as I'm concerned. It is John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith level brilliant. James Horner, you want to throw him in there. It is that good and sells the film just beautifully. It is a great movie and, yeah, my second favorite sports film and absolutely in my top 10 all-time favorite movies. The Natural, released on this day, 1984, starring Robert Redford, Barbara Hershey, Kim Basinger, Richard Farnsworth, Wilford Brimley, Darren McGavin, Glenn Close, and the always fire Robert Duvall. This has been episode 509 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Sunday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.